This is about to be one of the craziest podcast episodes of all time. We are back with This and That, Episode 0, Part 3, The Money Runs the World, aka The Great War section. So, This and That Part 1 gave you a tour de France on some of the craziest CIA operations, false flags, coups, and assassinations, and essentially the inner workings of the American deep state. Part 2 took you through some of the best resources, cases, studies, theories, etc. in the world of the UFO phenomenon and non-human intelligence, and those two episodes were honestly just a warm-up for what is about to happen today. So if you thought those first two episodes were pretty crazy, pretty conspiratorial, brace for impact, because this one is going to show you just how real this quote-unquote deep state, aka shadow cabal, aka the oligarchs who operate above government, aka the puppet masters who control our reality. We're going to peel back some layers in this episode. So not only is it going to be extremely apparent that the shadow cabal is more real than even most conspiracists think, but the realities of a very lengthy kill list is going to present itself in this episode. And if you use this as a base and you do your own research and you look up some of the names, some of the theories I put forth in this episode, it's going to become abundantly apparent that we do indeed live within a sinister system that is keeping humanity in chains from achieving world peace and free energy and evolving into our next layer of being. So before we start, I'll admit that this is definitely the episode I've been putting off for a while, a little bit of paranoia, but I do feel a moral obligation and honestly a higher calling to share these truths, because to be honest, there's nothing more important to talk about than what I'm going to talk about over the next hour or two. And if I'm going to start a media brand and a podcast, as I am, because I've been going down the rabbit hole for years and years and years, I'm going to talk about the most important stuff of all time. I'm going to synthesize the super scary reality that we live in. And while there is certainly part of me that thinks maybe I shouldn't talk about this stuff, the kill list, the free energy suppression, the sinister system, because honestly, it has gotten me paranoid and it has made me scared as someone pursuing a media empire in the 21st century. I know that I cannot shy away from these topics because, I can't live my life in fear, and I do feel a divine duty to help expose the corruption and evil on this planet and be a staunch advocate for world peace, for free energy, equality, justice, human oneness, etc., and to help enlighten the public, and hopefully over the course of the next few decades play my small role in helping to advance humanity to morally evolve, not only morally, but energetically, from this barbaric state we have been contained in for way too long. So if that's the intro, here's a little bit more on the disclaimer aspect. So before I go through this episode, I want to be clear, I'm not accusing any specific organization, any government, or any individual of committing any crimes. I'm not exposing some brand new secrets. I'm not asking anyone to do anything. This is not even a call to action. It's merely a synthesis, a guided tour through public information, documented history, and controversial narratives that exist because power creates opacity. I have no ambitions to ever get into politics. I want to put that out there now. I'm just a journalist. I'm just a podcaster. I'm not trying to get Kirked or JFK'd or MLK'd, and the list goes on. We're going to get into that in a moment. But just let the record indicate for now, I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm not trying to actually challenge the system in any way. These oligarchs that do run the world, I'm not trying to challenge them. I'm just going to be a user of the First Amendment. I'm an advocate for free speech. That's all I am. I'm a podcaster. I'm a talker. I'm a journalist. I'm a truth seeker. I'm an intellectual astronaut. I'm not a reformer. I'm not going to ever get into politics. So, I did not begin this whole media brand thing to ever be a rebel-rousing conspiracist or an enemy of the state or a threat to the cabal in any form. It's not my intention to ever be anyone's enemy, but, obviously this is part of my first ever podcast episode ever. I don't have any type of following yet, but, if I'm lucky enough one day to have my day in court on the JRE or Tucker or Lex Friedman or Sean Ryan or whatever, I feel the need to say it from the very beginning, especially before an episode like this and before my, podcasting YouTube career. I'm not trying to challenge the system. I'm not even trying to encourage any actual reform, because as I have come to learn, reform is quite dangerous. I'm just trying to inform the public, inform my peers, and this system can keep killing political reformers and free energy inventors and various whistleblowers. Keep in mind that these are probably the same people trafficking children and doing what they want to them, raping and potentially eating them. But, they can keep doing all that. That's fine. But I'm not trying to stop any of the corruption that goes on in the world. I'm just trying to use my First Amendment and enlighten the public. So this episode is officially called Money Runs the World, aka the Great War, because I'm going to describe a pattern that shows up across industries and across decades. When a person or an invention, a movement, or a truth threatens a massive system of profit and control, the system tends to respond. And sometimes it responds through PR, sometimes through regulation, sometimes through lawsuits, sometimes through buyouts, sometimes through censorship, but oftentimes, historically speaking, through blackmail, coercion, or murder. So, I'm not here to play judge. I'm just here to ask the questions, who benefits, who loses, what incentives are operating, what's being documented, what's disputed, in order to understand that while some of the cases I'll talk about today are documented and verified, there is a large portion of what I'm going to discuss today is completely a mystery and unproven and unresolved. So a lot of the stuff is going to be speculative, and while it's going to be based on facts and based on broader concepts and patterns, just know that some of the stuff I'm going to say is very speculative today, so do not take my word for it. Of course, do your own research. And so, I'm not pretending that the world is run by, a couple cartoon villains, because power is obviously more boring than that. It's networks, it's incentives, it's careerism. Don't rock the boat. It's too big to fail. Money often protects itself. And so, as stated, I'm not going to blame specifics, but if you're listening because you feel that there is this hidden architecture behind politics, media, tech, healthcare, energy, and war, this is the episode where we're going to map that architecture. And so, in a nutshell, that architecture includes the Great War segment, lists and case studies of all the martyred assassinations on various whistleblowers, political reformers, free energy inventors, decentralized crypto moguls, consciousness pioneers, and more. Say what you want about the quote-unquote deep state kill list, but there is a very lengthy number of people who have challenged the system in some way and ultimately died or disappeared or been murdered or quote-unquote suicided, whether it's right as their inventions were approaching commercialization or right as they were about to blow the whistle on something big. Maybe it is all one big coincidence, but if you're as far down the rabbit hole as me, you don't tend to believe in coincidences. So we're going to get into these patterns of free energy suppression, petrodollar hegemony, the Federal Reserve control system, the crypto Epstein theory. We're going to go through some Manchurian candidates and how that connects to the system at large. Talk about the asset managers like BlackRock and Vanguard and how they're connected to the Federal Reserve. Get into the planned obsolescence system, big pharma, modern day slavery, et cetera, et cetera. And some of this is going to be in the Money Runs the World Part 2 episode, which is going to follow this episode. So to conclude this intro and disclaimer, I'm just going to say, once you spend as much time as I have really diving deep into the control system and who really runs the world, once you look at money, power, and unnatural deaths long enough, it can make you feel like you're staring at a 1984 Matrix type of machine that never sleeps. And so the existence of this deep state and shadow cabal, or whatever you want to call it, it becomes overwhelmingly clear. But the one true thing that runs the world, it's not just a single organization or family or entity or society. It's not just the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers or JP Morgan or Israel or the CIA or the Federal Reserve, or the Royal Family, Bohemian Grove, etc. Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Group, Council on Foreign Relations, Freemasonry, a lot of people point to. It's one thing that represents all of those entities, and it's one thing that represents the evil, the greed, the power hungry, and at times psychopathic and borderline satanic nature of these oligarchs, the same oligarchs that likely were behind the JFK assassination. And that one thing is money, because money is power and power is influence. So without further ado, welcome to TNT episode 0, part 3, Money Runs the World. And so I'm going to run this episode in a bit of a top-down method. I'm going to start super high level and then get into the overarching patterns and some of the case studies and examples of what I'm about to run through. But, all the entities, people, and case studies, and obviously I couldn't even fit all of the stuff I'm about to run through in a 24-hour episode if I covered each person and each case study of all the names I'm about to list. So, every case study I give you, every name I say, I'm not going to go into detail, but, it's a guide for you to do a quick couple Google searches, search it up on ChatGPT, record this shit because it is genuinely the most important information of all time. And yeah, it's my understanding, that we are living through a biblical type of war that has persisted for centuries and millennium, between the forces of good and evil, and oftentimes these forces of good end up dead in mysterious circumstances or straight up murdered. And, with all the UFO and alien stuff being disclosed, I'm kind of starting to be of the belief that humanity could be, the playing ground for an interdimensional type of war going on planet Earth, and these forces that are malevolent and benevolent are manifesting themselves in humanity, and at the top of the food chain in humanity is likely to be controlled by certain alien species, that some are good, some are bad, and the results of the world that we see are probably a result of these interdimensional forces. And it sounds crazy to say, but I know enough to have created the map of these good guys versus these bad guys, and I can give that high picture speculation. But oftentimes it ends with the best people, the best reformers, the ones who want world peace and free energy, and to advance humanity to the next layer of becoming. Look at the graphic I put together on the JFK Tesla handshake, because honestly it does all go back to that. It was JFK that said, "Too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought." It was Tesla that said, "If you wish to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, vibrations, and frequency." So I'm about to get into the Sinister system here, the institutions that make up the Shadow Cabal, and obviously I'm not saying everyone that works for these institutions is evil in any manner. I'm just saying that these are the institutions and entities and family names and people that have systematically contributed to an overwhelmingly malignant system. Obviously, you're not an evil person if you work for the Federal Reserve or the Rothschilds or DARPA or Palantir, etc. I'm not even saying the people at the very top of these companies are evil, because people don't have to be evil to work for an entity that does not have the best interest of broader humanity. You're an evil person if you kidnap and rape children, not if you work for these institutions. But broadly speaking, there does tend to seem to be some form of a connection. So here it is, the system's body count, the Great War, starting off on the evil empire, the Sinister system. They're driven by money, power, greed, and evil, with probably proclivities towards Satanism or Luciferianism. Baal and Moloch are kind of the two evil gods that have kind of manifested, and kind of the two evil gods that people talk about when sacrificing children and when talking about Bohemian Grove and Epstein type of circles. So the main entities behind the Shadow Cabal, we got the global intel apparatus. That's obviously the CIA, NSA, FBI, their COINTELPRO service, the Mossad, Department of Energy and classified energy programs, UAP energy programs that have remained classified for decades. Obviously there's the big tech and surveillance era. We got Palantir today. It used to be programs like Stellar Wind, Pegasus, Prism, mainstream media and narrative control. The asset managers like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. Obviously, the military-industrial complex is kind of the entity that holds it all together, with the defense contractors like Lockheed, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman being the ones that benefit the most. And then obviously there's the Federal Reserve and central banking system, which is the fiat system. We got big pharma, coups, DARPA, and then to go to the power structures. What makes up this permanent government, the Shadow Cabal. Some of the societies are secret, some of them are not so secret, like the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations. People use the overarching word of the Illuminati a lot. There's obviously the Bohemian Grove, and all of that is kind of represents what could be a quote-unquote New World Order. And obviously there's the Epstein network, which is defined by the compromat and pedo elite. There's been consistent regime change and coups and planned obsolescence and consumer control, petrodollar and fossil fuel hegemony. And then some of the dynasties and families are obviously the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, the J.P. Morgan, the British royal family. Some of the modern architects and faces we got Alan Dulles, J. Edgar Hoover, kind of the main forces behind the CIA and FBI and the shadow government of the United States. And then there's Epstein, Richard Helms, James Angleton, a part of Alan Dulles, his old boys crew, Jolly West and Sidney Gottlieb, the dark chemist behind MK Ultra. Mike Pompeo, Donald Barr, some other power-hungry modern figures. We got Dick Cheney, Bill and Hill Clinton, Bill Gates, Leslie Wexner, Henry Kissinger, Benjamin Netanyahu, Peter Thiel, Ehud Barak, Jared Kushner, Richard Helms, James Angleton, Howard Lutnick, and Donald Barr. There's a couple repeats in there, my bad. And then even this war is something that goes back, decades and centuries and millennium. And so it does go back to these heinous dictators, Hitler, Stalin, Mao Zedong, Mussolini, even Augusto Pinochet, who the United States put in power. And some of the old Roman empires like Nero, Caligula, and Tiberius, who, likely ate children. Tiberius did. So this, I know I threw a lot at you there. This kind of portrays the one side of the system, the evil empire, the shadow cabal, and these are kind of the entities, the people, the frameworks that are responsible for the deaths of all these people I'm about to name, which is the human flourishing list, the kill list. Those who threaten the system are systematically eliminated. So this is some graphics you probably can't read on the screen, but I put together in some social media posts of the Great War in action. So the people on, the good guys are the ones who, want humanity to thrive, want humanity to evolve. They're often advocates for world peace and free energies, and they blow the whistle on some whatever type of corruption is going on. So they're kind of driven by the concepts of world peace, free energy, equality, human oneness, transparency. Some of the leaders of the good guys include JFK, Caesarion, the son of Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, who's supposed to lead the world in a dualistic Roman-Egypt hybrid empire. And obviously this shit goes back hundreds and hundreds of years to Socrates, who was martyred, Jesus Christ, who was martyred, and even Abe Lincoln, who was likely martyred for reasons beyond just a lone gunman. And so some of the peace and civil rights and anti-war icons, we got JFK, we got his brother RFK, we got MLK, we got Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, John Lennon, Gandhi, Jesus, John the Baptist, Socrates, and the most recent add to that list is Charlie Kirk. And then some of the anti-imperial and national sovereignty leaders, we got Patrice Lumumba, Salvador Allende, Thomas Sankara, Muammar Gaddafi. These are some foreign leaders who kind of challenged the military-industrial complex and sun system, and oftentimes the United States played a covert role in the overthrow of their regime and their assassinations. Two of the biggest names in conspiracy lore, Serge Monast and Milton Cooper, and I'm going to do a segment on Project Bluebeam at the end of this episode. I believe I touched on it at the end of the UFO episode as well, but they both died in super mysterious ways. They're kind of the two biggest names arguably in all of conspiracy lore. Milton Cooper as the Alex Jones before Alex Jones that called 9/11. But I'll get into them later. Continue these names, some other whistleblowers and transparency, and not even all of these people died in suspect ways, but just some modern whistleblowers. We got Ed Snowden, Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Gary Webb, Daniel Ellsberg, Andrew Breitbart, Seth Rich, and Max Spears. Some other important miscellaneous deaths, Sushir Baliji, the ChatGPT guy, Danny Casolaro, the Octopus Murders guy, Princess Diana. We had Strauss, Astor, and Guggenheim who died on the Titanic. And then Terrence Yeaky represents the OKC 95 conspiracy false flag. And then some of the free energy and disruptive tech people. Obviously it all goes back to Nikola Tesla, but other energy inventors, Dmitry Petronov, Stefan Marinov, Stanley Meyer, the GEC Marconi scientists. There was over 25 of them that died in really suspect ways. They're working on a black budget. I'll get into them in a second. Eugene Mavlov, Ari Dege, Tom Ogle, and the Ogle Mobile. Look that one up. Nuno Lorio, Carl Grillmar are the last list of names that have been added to the list in 2026. That's the MIT fusion scientist, the Caltech astrophysicist, and I'll get into the modern disappearances and deaths of people linked to the secret UFO program. And this is what's been going on in late 2025 and 2026. There's been like 10 plus disappearances in the UFO program, and it seems to me like it's almost the story of the decade, and it's a very scary story. Some other digital freedom fighters and crypto kings that died in super mysterious ways. Nikolai Mushegian, John McAfee, Fernando Alagaba. And I'll get into that chain in detail. Some people who were killed, they're related to the JFK case in one way or another. George de Morenchild, Marilyn Monroe, and Mary Meyer. some UFO and alien-related deaths. We got Carl Wolf and John Mack. Some other miscellaneous deaths that seem like there was higher powers in play. Stanley Kubrick, Frank Olson is related to MK Ultra, Mark Middleton related to the Clintons and probably Epstein, and then William Colby, one of the only moral CIA directors of all time. He released the family jewels. He released the most transparency into the CIA we have ever seen in the history of our country. And he went for a canoe ride and, never came back. Some other consciousness pioneers that died in weird ways. We got Itzhak Bentov and Pat Price. And then lastly, some Manchurian candidates, which is, the government essentially training and mind washing, mind controlling certain people to carry out assassinations, political assassinations. And there is now documented, declassified evidence that Tim McVeigh, Ciaran, Jack Ruby, and Lee Harvey Oswald were all Manchurian candidates operating under MK Ultra mind control techniques. And kind of Jolly West and Sidney Gottlieb, like I mentioned before, were the people who pioneered this mind control type of technology and techniques. So I'm going to spend this episode trying to naturally interweave as many of these names into some of the following big time topics. And I'm going to give a quick primer at the end of this podcast episode going through each of these people I just named, who I didn't get the chance to get to naturally throughout the course of this episode. And, I'll give a few sentences on their death and kind of the broader implications of why people think there's a conspiracy in play. So yeah, that's the intro for this episode. And now we're going to get into arguably the three most important threads of all time. First up, we got the free energy suppression thread. Then we're going to get into the central banking and federal control system thread. And then lastly, we're going to get into the Epstein files and show you just how far that rabbit hole goes. And now to start the free energy rabbit hole, we got the Great War opening scene between Nikola Tesla and J.P. Morgan. This is the natural starting point for this episode. It's a feud that is essentially a microcosm that perfectly captures the essence of the great world and the money runs the world system. This is an all-time battle between two of our main characters in this theater of the story of humanity. And it's not with a committing hearing, it's not with a leaked memo, it's with an archetypal biblical matchup, Nikola Tesla versus JP Morgan. It's human flourishing versus institutional control. It's abundance versus scarcity. It's the inventor who wanted to upgrade civilization versus the banker whose job it was to own the upgrades. It's the dude who wanted to provide free energy to the world and fundamentally change what it meant to be human, and it is the most powerful banker of all time who disallowed that to happen. And so our antagonist on the team of the power-hungry shitbag oligarchs, we have the most powerful and influential banker in the history of America. The man who sunk the Titanic to facilitate the biggest banking coup of all time and create the Federal Reserve in 1913. The man who literally privatized the United States government. The man who took away the sovereignty of our nation by making our government a slave to the centralized fiat system. The man whose son, JP Jr., took over the bank and got so lustful with power, he tried to orchestrate the business plot of 1933 and overthrow FDR and establish a fascist-style dictatorship in America. Look that one up. People don't know about the business plot of 33. That shit is insane. The man whose name is in my wallet and in everyone's wallets. He's got his name on the corner of every single street in America. And, he's one of the team captains of the Sinister system. And, I can talk all the shit I possibly can, but this dude is dancing on me from his grave because his name is in my wallet, John Pierpont Morgan. And our protagonist is the man who Einstein bowed down to as the smartest man of the 20th century, the man who took JP Morgan's $150K in funding and said, fuck the radio transmission, I'm creating the wireless transmission of power, the man who has largely been forgotten about, the man who's on my t-shirt right this second, the man whose files were seized by John Trump, Donald's uncle, the dude who claimed to have invented a death ray, the guy obsessed with the Great Pyramids and who claimed to be contacted by aliens at one point, the guy who threatened the entire system and to replace the entire fossil fuel industry. We got the mad scientist saint, the Serbian American, Nikola Tesla. And that's the Great War in a nutshell. The moment an invention threatens the business model fights back. Tesla was thinking wireless power. He was thinking a world where energy became so cheap it changed what it meant to be human. And as the story goes, Morgan backs Tesla until the mission shifts from communication that you could put on a meter to power without a meter, and suddenly the investment stops making sense because you cannot build an empire on something you can't control, bill, and throttle. So if you ever wondered why certain breakthroughs feel like they disappear and why some ideas get mocked into oblivion, why the people who push too hard end up broke, silenced, discredited, or buried, welcome to this part of the Money Runs the World segment, the free energy segment. This episode is not me accusing one guy or any entity of pulling any of the strings. It's just me mapping the incentives that run the world, and using Tesla versus Morgan as our starting point because it is truly a myth of the modern age. Because Tesla wanted to give the world fire and the system just wanted to sell matches. Let's begin. All right, the story of Nikola Tesla's pursuit of free energy technology is probably the most important case of technological suppression in all of history. It is kind of the birth of modern free energy suppression era. He initially was Tom Edison's main competitor in the race to electrify America via the light bulb, but his trajectory changed dramatically when he shifted his focus from commercial electricity to his vision of providing unlimited wireless power to the world, aka free energy, and this is the transition that proved fatal to his career, fatal to his life, and fatal to humanity. So when Tesla revealed his ambitions to Morgan, who owned significant stakes in General Electric, copper mines, and AT&T, Morgan not only pulled his funding but actively worked to destroy Tesla's prospects. Morgan had expected Tesla to develop technology for transmitting energy that could be metered and sold, and instead Tesla wanted to create a system of free energy that anyone could access. And so similarly, John Rockefeller, whose Standard Oil monopoly controlled 90% of America's oil production at the time, he also recognized Tesla's free energy ambitions as an existential threat to his empire. And so between Morgan's control of electrical infrastructure and Rockefeller's dominance of fossil fuels, Tesla found himself pitted against the two most powerful men in America. So yes, this is the story of the smartest man in the world in the early 20th century, finding himself battling against the two most powerful and two richest men in the country, because they wanted to build their empires, and he wanted to propel humanity forward. And so Morgan responds by investing heavily in Tesla's competitors like Edison and Marconi, while warning other potential investors to avoid Tesla entirely. So the message was clear: you don't bite the hands that feeds you, aka you don't try and create free energy. And so Tesla was systematically blacklisted from receiving further investment, which explains why he died penniless despite his genius, and why 84% of the world's energy still comes from fossil fuels today. That is a disgusting percent. If Tesla succeeded, I guarantee that would be somewhere between 0 and 2%. And so had JP been more of a humanitarian and encouraged Tesla to pursue this wireless transmission of power and dumped more money into the Wardenclyffe Tower, I don't think fossil fuels would ever have been used again after a couple decades. I genuinely think that if JP supported Tesla, that fossil fuels would be seen as barbaric and wasteful and archaic, instead of still being the norm today. Instead, free energy could never be actualized. And then before you know it, it's 1970 and Kissinger is negotiating with the Saudis to create the petrodollar system, after the Rockefellers gave all our gold away from Fort Knox to the European elites. Quick little tangent. There's a story of one of Rockefeller's secretaries who sent a letter that the Rockefellers gave all their gold to the elites of Europe, aka the Rothschilds, and a day later she is thrown off a balcony and dies. And now they use our Federal Reserve and our military to control the world. And they may not destroy America because they do need those two things at the end of the day. They need the United States military and they need the Federal Reserve and the central banking system in the U.S. to continue to control the world, which is the only reason the United States will continue to remain a sovereign nation in the future. But despite this opposition, Tesla remained obsessed with realizing his vision of free energy until his death in 1943. His dedication to this pursuit led him to intensively study the Great Pyramids of Giza, as he believes they had originally functioned as massive power plants. This is a theory that is gaining massive traction in light of new discoveries by people like Filippo Biondi, showing that there's likely structures that go down hundreds of meters into the earth. And this all goes back to Christopher Dunn's Giza power plant theory. And the significance of Tesla's research became evident when the Office of Alien Property, in conjunction with the FBI, seized all of his papers immediately after his death, with many documents remaining classified to this day. And the facts that literally the world's most prolific inventor with over 300 patents and the foundation for much of our modern technology spent his final decades fixated on free energy and the technological secrets of the ancient Egyptians suggest he may have been on the verge of a discovery that powerful interests needed to suppress or perhaps intercept. And I use the word intercept because, funny enough, it was John Trump, Donald's uncle, who's an MIT theoretical physicist, who seized all of Tesla's papers. He was the one studying them and trying to reverse engineer Tesla's potential inventions that he hadn't gotten to yet. And this conspiracy that people point to is Ingersoll Lockwood's trilogy written in the 1890s titled The Adventures of Baron Trump and the Last President. And John Trump, who's also said to be involved in the Philadelphia experiment, which is the super mysterious USS Eldridge being disappeared or teleported in 1943, a few months after Tesla dies. I mentioned the Philadelphia experiment in my CIA operations first episode, and then just a little bit more on that Ingersoll Lockwood trilogy. It's literally about a young kid named Baron and his mentor named Don, and the similarities are striking. There's like a gold tower in New York that they live in that is akin to Trump Tower. The whole thing is ridiculous. That was written in the 1890s, and the theory there is like, oh, John Trump stole Tesla's papers and he found out a way to do time travel, and that's why Ingersoll Lockwood is literally writing a story about Barron and Donald Trump, and it's just so strikingly similar to the story today. So yeah. And then I also put together a timeline slideshow here. This was from 1884 to 1943. We got 84 when Tesla arrives in the U.S. and begins working for Edison. They soon part ways due to differences in their approaches to electricity. 91, Tesla then patents the AC induction motor and transformer, which revolutionizes the transmission of electricity, threatening the DC power monopoly of Edison and Morgan. 1901 is when Tesla's trajectory changes dramatically. He shifts his focus from commercial electricity to this grand vision of providing unlimited wireless power to the world. Right then and there, JP Morgan and Rockefeller, they fuck him over. They stop investing in him and they blacklist him from getting any funding from any other wealthy investors, fearing that his invention would undermine their empire in the fossil fuel industry. And then in 43 is when Tesla dies penniless in his New York hotel room, and his papers are seized by the government and John Trump. And today, of course, I mentioned that 84% of the world still runs on fossil fuels. And it goes back to this archetypal biblical rivalry between Tesla and JP Morgan and Rockefeller. And obviously unfortunately, as is often in this world, the power hungry sinister system won. Tesla lost, fossil fuels remain, free energy suppressed. So the Tesla story and the rivalry of Tesla and JP was the obvious intro to this free energy suppression section, and I wish that was the end of the story. I really genuinely do wish that it was just a story of Nikola Tesla about free energy, but oh my god, the names, there are dozens and dozens of names and stories, and it is clear that there is a system that kills to preserve itself, and to preserve this $1 trillion fossil fuel industry that would be rendered obsolete time and time again by these brilliant scientists who die under mysterious circumstances and have their work disappeared. So unfortunately, the suppression of free energy did not end with Tesla. Throughout this 20th century, many investors have made breakthroughs in alternative energy and met suspicious and untimely deaths. Perhaps the most notable was Stanley Meyer, who developed a car that could run on water through his patented water fuel cell technology. And Meyer demonstrated his water-powered dune buggy to numerous witnesses and gained significant media attention in the 1990s. But just as he was negotiating potential deals to commercialize his technology, he died suddenly in 1998 after dinner at a restaurant. His infamous dying words, "They poisoned me," is what he screamed in the parking lot of the restaurant as he died from some type of poisoning. This, along with the mysterious disappearance of his research papers and prototypes, suggests he met the same fate as other inventors who threatened the energy status quo. And the pattern continues with other pioneering inventors who developed revolutionary energy technologies. I will point to Eugene Mavlov, a highly highly respected MIT nuclear engineer who had advocated for cold fusion research and exposed data manipulation that unfairly discredited the field. He was mysteriously killed in 1994. There's Mark Tomian, who developed the star drive device that allegedly produced more energy than it consumed, and he died under questionable circumstances just as his technology was getting attention. Similarly, Stefan Marinov was a physicist researching perpetual motion and free energy devices. He allegedly committed suicide by jumping from a library window, though many people questioned this official narrative. Similarly, there's Dmitry Petronov, who claimed to have developed a plasma-based free energy device. He died in a mysterious house fire along with all of his research just weeks before a scheduled public demonstration. And a few other names worth mentioning are Zachary Warfield, Rory Johnson, and Artie Dege. So some other free energy stories, a little tidbit on the Invention Secrecy Act before I continue. The Invention Secrecy Act of 1951 was passed by Congress in October of 51, became public law in 52, and this allowed the government to withhold patents and impose secrecy orders on inventions and that were deemed detrimental to national security, which extended World War II era provisions into peacetime. So yeah, any high-level invention that is deemed some form of a security threat, and by security threat they mean profit threat, is literally just held secret and just completely suppressed, and that is it's the law to do so. It's literally within our United States laws to suppress and censor inventions, and it has happened time and again. So next, let's get into my guy Tom Ogle and the Oglemobile. Ogle is one of the cleanest suppressed inventor case studies because he literally developed a 100+ mile per gallon vapor carb. That was not just a rumor. He publicly demonstrated it. He drove from El Paso to a city called Deming on just 2 gallons, inspected by outside engineers and even backed by a patent. And the story turns dark in the exact way this rabbit hole always does. Deal pressure, alleged investor legal traps, a shooting, and a sudden death at age 26, officially ruled an accidental alcohol overdose, leaving his idea as a public domain footnote instead of a mass-produced reality. So yeah, Ogle developed a car that could run on over 100 miles per gallon, and there's a shooting there's an assassination attempt on him that failed, and then he's dead from alcohol poisoning. Yeah, I'm sure he drank too much that night, right? Oh, God. And then there is the GEC Marconi scientist. This is perhaps the scariest thread in the entire free energy suppression narrative. This GEC Marconi cluster in the 1980s was a stretch where dozens of UK scientists, there was 25 plus, probably 30 plus, that were tied to high-tech defense work. This was in the Star Wars program, aka the Strategic Defense Initiative under Reagan. That was likely some type of a black budget. And so the mainstream frame is that all of these people died of stress, tragedy, coincidence inside a pressure cooker industry. But the dark frame, Stephen Greer type of opinion, is that the SDI in the Star Wars was an obvious cover label for a black budget research and development on directed energy weapons, plasma physics, guidance and sensor systems. Obviously the kind of tooling you would want if you were tracking objects that don't fly like planes, they fly like UFOs. So yes, the Star Wars program was a UFO black budget cover-up program, and 30 plus scientists ended up dying because they were likely exposed to revolutionary energy technologies that would, of course, render the fossil fuel system obsolete if applied at a large scale. And then so Greer's kind of notion is that, this was the kind of tooling you'd want if you were tracking UFOs, and then a small subset of these scientists that became liabilities. They're probably the moral ones who are gonna blow the whistle on this stuff. And I'm not claiming all of this is confirmed fact. I'm not accusing anyone of murder. I'm not accusing any entity of murder. I'm not talking shit about any government. I love the U.S. government. I love all the governments. I love everyone. But as a story, it is horrifying because it collapses 3 lanes into one. There's the secret science, there's the weaponized funding channels, and a pattern of convenient silencing. And so if even part of this framework is real, as the overarcher broad picture would indicate, it would mean that this scariest suppression isn't a patent getting ignored, it's a program protecting itself. And researchers usually point to names like Vimal Dijahabi, who fell from a bridge, David Sands, who had a high-speed car crash into a wall, Arshad Shaif, this mechanism makes no sense case, as the most nightmare fuel entries in the GEC Marconi cluster. There, again, 30 plus deaths officially ruled accident or suicide, but argued by skeptics to be so mechanically bizarre, that they read like staged endings rather than random tragedy. So yeah, the GEC Marconi cluster, which I didn't even come across, I only came across recently. I wrote a 25-page paper on free energy suppression, and this is probably the craziest story that I've come across in the entire thread. And I didn't even get to it after, dozens and dozens of hours of researching this topic. And then there's Thomas Henry Murray. In the 30s, Murray claimed to have invented a device that could extract radiant energy from the environment. He reported being threatened, shot at, and having his laboratory ransacked. I don't believe he was murdered, but obviously threatened. And now let's get into Thomas Townsend Brown, who, in all likelihood, besides Tesla, is the most important name in the reverse engineering technology of UFOs and free energy thread. And his kind of field of work was not only anti-gravity, but a specific term called electrogravitics. So Brown is kind of one of those weird hinge figures in the UFO propulsion and free energy suppression. And he kind of connects those two paradigms. And so in the 1920s through 50s, he becomes obsessed with the idea that electricity and gravity are not separate, and that if you apply a strong electric field in the right asymmetrical way, you can produce a thrust-like effect. And so that is why people later called it the Byfield Brown effect, where it had to do with high voltage and asymmetric capacitor geometry and a measurable push. I'm not going to bore you with the science. If you want to do a deep dive on Thomas Townsend Brown, Jesse Michaels in American Alchemy is the one that put me onto him. He's got a good documentary on him. You can go get into the nitty gritty of all the science stuff. But for now, I'll just say that skeptics will tell you that in normal air, this could be explained away by ion wind and electrohydrodynamics, which is like charged air molecules creating thrust. But the reason that TTB becomes so legendary is that even if the mainstream explanation is right for a lot of the demonstration, his work still sits at the boundary of something much bigger, the dream that you could eventually manipulate gravity or inertia the way we manipulate electromagnetism. And so this is where the Great War theme kicks in, because if any version of electrogravitics is real, even a primitive version, it's not just a cooler airplane, it's a civilization reset button. It is flying from New York City to Australia on a commercial airline in 10 minutes if you want. It's a craft that doesn't rely on combustion. It doesn't need traditional lift. And so if the Byfield Brown effect is real, that's another invention that renders the entire fossil fuel system obsolete if applied at a large scale. And obviously the military industrial complex is the defense contractors, the quote unquote sinister system, the people that profit, they're the one who stand to lose everything if this technology is applied at a large scale. That's what I'll say over and over again in this episode. The people in the sinister system, the military industrial complex, the defense contractors, the oil companies, the coal companies, the entire fossil fuel industry, entire governments that benefit from the fossil fuel industry, i.e. the United States fucking government, and their deal with the Saudis that is our dollar is backed by nothing besides petrol. They're the ones that stand to lose everything. They're the ones that don't allow this technology to get out time and time and time again. So Townsend Brown becomes the perfect case study in this pattern you see again and again in these stories. The moment a line of research hints at space-time manipulation, it either gets dismissed as crank science, swallowed into classified contracting, or fractured into 1,000 dead ends until the public is left debating, is it real, while the serious work happens behind closed doors. And that's why his name keeps popping up whenever people talk about anti-gravity black projects and the word that become the umbrella label for it all, electrogravitics and free energy suppression. And so if this was an isolated incident, one inventor dying under mysterious circumstances while developing revolutionary energy tech, I would be fine dismissing that as a coincidence. Even, 2 such cases could be explained away. But the sheer number of inventors who have met untimely deaths just as their technology approached viability, combined with a consistent pattern of their research materials vanishing and their work never seeing implementation, reveals a systematic effort to suppress these technologies. And I mentioned dozens of names in the past 15 minutes talking about the free energy story, and just know that I have not even scratched the surface of the dozens and dozens and dozens of other names I have not been able to research yet, because I'm sure this is a thread that is beyond even my imagination. And so in each case, we see this same sequence that an inventor makes significant progress on alternative energy tech, attracts attention or investment, approaches the point of public demonstration or commercialization, and then dies under questionable circumstances and has their research materials disappear. This repeating pattern spanning decades and continents suggests an organized and well-resourced effort to prevent free energy tech from reaching the public, a continuation of the same forces that drove Nikola Tesla to poverty and seized his research upon death. Fortunately, there is a lot more renewed interest in this theme because of the case of the current dead scientists. I mentioned this before. In 2025, 2026, there has been a renewed pattern of suppression and pattern of essentially the best scientists in America, the ones who literally have testified before Congress. And I'm quoting Congressman Tim Burchett. Praise be to Tim Burchett for being one of the last true freedom fighters in D.C. He said that these are the people that have testified before Congress. They are the leaders in the scientific community in the UFO reverse engineering world, and they are being disappeared. They are dying under mysterious circumstances. And this is right after President Trump in February 2026 publicly pledged and directed the government to release files related to UAP, aliens, and extraterrestrial life. So the playbook is there for anyone willing to look. The President of the United States says we are going to declassify the UFO secret program and the existence of aliens, and then all of a sudden the best scientists in the country are dying at insane rates. A few of the names I'll touch on, and I mentioned 9. I'm only going to mention 3 right now. Probably the biggest name that a lot of people have heard about at this point. I at least saw, NBC and John Muir doing a segment on this. That's how you know it's so bad that even the mainstream is reporting on it. We got Major General William Neal McCasland. He's a retired Air Force major who went missing in February 2026. This became a focal point in the online dead missing scientist discourse because of his prior roles in the Air Force research and development circles, and because there's congressmen and writers that are clearly tying him to UAP lore. And then we have Nuno Loureiro, the MIT plasma scientist and fusion director. He was shot and killed in December 2025. This is an obvious case that is confirmed on an elite scientist being killed at his house in the middle of the night. There's Carl Grillmeyer, the Caltech astrophysicist. He's the one who was capable of detecting essentially life on other planets. He identified water on exoplanets near our solar system. He was shot and killed February 2026. And so this renewed interest in the current case of the dead scientist definitely for me hits a lot harder knowing what I know about the long history of free energy suppression, and whether this is actual free energy type of suppression or just kind of the broader UFO reverse engineering program and existence of alien life on other planets. Like, it's an astrophysicist, it's an MIT fusion scientist, it's a retired Air Force general, so kind of not necessarily just energy technology, but potentially broader, identifying alien type of people. And it's important to know that we have congressmen like Tim Burchett, like Anna Paulina Luna, literally telling the media that there's likely a conspiracy in play. Americans need to start waking up because our top scientists are the smartest people in America that testified before Congress. That's the most important part, is these people I just mentioned, these people I'm not even mentioning, are the ones that testified before Congress. And then Trump says he's going to release the UFO files, and then they start dying at incredible rates. So If you want to just write it off as a coincidence, go and write it off as a coincidence. But if you are as far down the rabbit hole as me, I've said it before, you don't believe in coincidences, especially not to this extent. And so, yeah, the timing it's eerie, it's stark. Trump has released the files. Burchett is warning about whistleblower fear, and that's why people are not coming forward. That's why people are not blowing the lid on this back engineering UFO, technology and the existence of aliens. And, we have congressmen saying that people are actively afraid of getting killed if they come forward, and that's why the number of whistleblowers is limited, and the ones that do come forward are killed. And then you have a string of these high profile cases. And the internet is immediately trying to stitch this into one narrative that, this is part of a kill list. Maybe it's all coincidences. It's scary. It's really scary. And, the reason I'm creating a media brand, doing a podcast, is because I'm trying to enlighten the public. I'm a lot farther down the rabbit hole than the average Joe. I listen to podcasts and watch documentaries and take notes and turn them into articles and dissertations. And I do my information cataloging, on a daily basis. And I know that other people don't. They just want to focus on their finance jobs. They don't want to know all this stuff, because once you know as much as I do, it becomes really hard to climb a corporate ladder your whole life. And I get it. I get why people don't want to know about this stuff, but at some point in time, the general public needs to wake up, because, eventually all of our scientists are going to be dead, and we're going to be living in the world of fossil fuels for 500 years when it should have been replaced hundreds of years ago. The free energy closer, I'm going to point to Stephen Greer's documentary, The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It. And the overarching thesis of Greer in this documentary is that UFO secrecy is not just about, are we alone? Aliens are obviously real. They've been here. They've been monitoring us. Humanity is likely the result of alien experimentation, whatever you want to believe. It's extraterrestrial, could be crypto-terrestrial, probably interdimensional. But it's about this century of suppressed energy technology that's honestly more important than the existence of aliens. This breakthrough energy and propulsion systems, since the late 1800s, disruptive energy inventions have been confiscated, bought, intimidated, or black shelved, and that much of the most advanced work now lives inside classified programs and defense contractor ecosystems like Lockheed Skunk Works, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, etc. They are perpetually kept at these defense contracting companies and never released into the public. And so this implication, if true, is obviously civilization changing, where near zero cost energy would rewrite everything: desalination, clean air and water, manufacturing, transportation, and the basic economics of poverty and abundance. And that's exactly why Greer argues it stays buried. It would render the entire $1 trillion fossil fuel system obsolete, and centralized grids and the broader scarcity based model of control. The world as we live in would have you believe that the earth is a very scarce place with limited resources, but that is because we are not tapped into the world of free energy. We are tapped into the mere fossil fuel, non-renewable types of energy, which is scarce, but the universe is abundant, and these inventions have been made that would allow humanity to evolve. It would solve problems of poverty, and it would solve most of the world's problems we live in. But the people that control the world, the people that profit the most, the people that operate above government, do not let this shit get out, because it would render their power more obsolete, because they thrive on this fossil fuel industry. And Steve Greer connects this to a bigger Truman Show and Plato's cave type of thesis that we live inside an engineered paradigm of planned obsolescence and managed scarcity, where anything that threatens the model gets neutralized. And so whether you buy the full extent of this conspiracy that I am laying forth upon you, the core question that the film forces is simple: are we being held back on purpose, and what would the world look like if the best technology was not classified? And I'll end this free energy thread, part 1 of the Money Runs the World episode, by saying that It's funny because if you tell 99% plus of the general public that there is a shadow cabal that kills free energy scientists every time an invention is made, and every time an invention threatens the fossil fuel system, they're going to look at you like you're crazy. But it really is only crazy until you start fucking reading something, until you start looking into the things that actually matter. It's not very hard to realize. Just Google 5 of the names, Google 5 of the case studies that I have been talking about, do 20 minutes of AI research, and it'll become overwhelmingly clear that there's no debate on what is actually going on. And it would be great for the Earth to be saved and to make this shift from fossil fuels and non-renewable resources. But one of the reasons that reminds me every morning when I wake up is the sound of these lawnmowers, and it just every single day I hear lawnmowers and seeing people fill up their cars on gas and complaining about how gas prices have risen since the Iran war, and I'm just constantly reminded every single day of the free energy suppression that exists, and that we are not supposed to be using this technology anymore. We should have stopped using this technology in the early 1900s. It's been hundreds of years of suppression, and we are still using barbaric energy technology. Fossil fuel system is literally barbaric, and it is being held together because a cabal that operates above government runs the world and doesn't allow this tech to get out. Obviously I seem a little crazy to people who haven't gotten their feet wet, and for people who haven't looked into any of this stuff. But I'll continue my disclaimer and say I'm not trying to cause an uprising. I will bow down to the system. I'm not trying to make any enemies. So I'm just trying to use my First Amendment, and just enlighten the world. And hopefully one day that we won't be hearing, when I wake up in the morning, I won't be hearing a lawnmower that I can hear from 5 houses down. And hopefully that there will be some type of free energy implemented. Please, at some point, please.